Hey Tribe, Chelsea here with Tribe RN. I love that you guys are joining us today to talk to Christy about her role in the pharmaceutical industry. I am so excited to learn from you. I know you have a plethora of knowledge, 30 years, which I'm just blown away from your experience from med-surg to home care, nurse coordinator, and now pharmacy with some things in between that I've missed. I'm so excited to learn from you. So thanks for joining us, Christy.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so we have a lot to learn and a lot to cover. So those of you who are tuning in, just get your questions in, and as they flow with our conversation, I will get your questions answered by Christy. So why don't we just jump in and you tell me how it is that you realize that you have a passion for the pharmacy industry?
Well, I think it happened when I worked in my last position as a coordinator in a brain tumor program. That was kind of my first step away from really doing any kind of direct patient care. I was in an office kind of off-site, but it was still part of the hospital. Okay. And I worked for a surgeon, a brain tumor surgeon. And so I encountered different people from different industries, like medical device representatives, people that worked in the OR, just all different kind of vendors. And I came to know some of the representatives who represented chemotherapy type medications that they sold. So my interest was piqued as I got to talk to them and learn that they talk to physicians, they talk to nurses, they talk about their products, the pros, the cons, the benefits that they might offer for some patients. And I really thought that was a neat way that I could use my nursing background in a different way. Have a little bit more flexibility with my schedule, with my weekends. And I did just some research by talking to some people that I met. Also talked to the director of pharmacy at the hospital where I work, and just did a lot of reaching out to people to try and find out, what I needed to understand. But after I got into it, I say probably within the first few years of being in the industry is where I realized that I had found a specialty that was a good fit for me. And so I've stayed in it ever since. So for 20 of my 30 years in nursing, I've been in the pharmaceutical industry.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So I guess we can just talk about, do you feel like your prior nursing practice is essential for what you do here?
Yes, absolutely. I think the things that nurses bring to the pharmaceutical industry is our clinical acumen and knowledge that people who don't have that background just don't have. When I meet a physician, I have instant rapport. They know that I'm someone that understands the language, understands how they present patients. So when you're talking about a patient, John Smith presents with XYZ symptoms. These are his lab values. These are his chief complaints. These are his medical history. If I'm talking with a physician about a particular condition for which my medicine is suited, we have more of a dialogue and a conversation. And it's more clinical, and therefore it seems more realistic and more just beneficial. So I feel like I couldn't do that job. I can't imagine people not having a medical background doing that job, because for me, I find it a lot easier by having a nursing background.
For sure. So this probably isn't a place where a new grad should or could start.
Probably not. It depends, though. A new grad, typically they would want probably someone with at least a year's worth of experience, but it depends. So, for example, today I was contacted by a recruiter on LinkedIn who had a clinical support position. And when I asked her for more details, they prefer to have someone with experience, but they look at a new grad who had a bachelor's of science degree because they'd be willing to train. So it depends probably on the subcategory of the industry that a person was looking in. For things like medical devices, equipment that's sold in the OR, it could be anything from like diagnostic equipment, tools like suction or different things like that. They'll train. And so it requires just maybe a little bit of knowledge about the OR environment, but not necessarily experience working in the OR. And they can do that because they have extensive training programs to train you for what you need to know to work in the OR as a clinical support person or as a salesperson.
Okay. So what was your training like in terms of you being in your current role? What's that training like?
For my current role as a clinical educator, it is an awful lot of disease state training. So
Okay.
the company provides weeks worth of what we call home study training, where you have these different online modules and tests you have to go through,
Mhm.
verbalizations with trainers to make sure you fully understand the whole disease state. And that includes things like clinical studies. So if there are any reprints or clinical studies that are pertinent to the disease state, you have to understand that. Anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology, you have to understand what's worked for that disease state before. So if there are different classes of medicines, for example, that also treat that condition, you have to understand that. If there have been different classes of medicines that have been tried in that condition and they don't work, you have to understand that.
Mhm.
And then also they teach you a lot of information about understanding who it is you're going to be talking to. So as a clinical educator, my primary role is to educate patients, but I also speak at advocacy events and I also support my sales team in other ways. So during training, you'll also get some training about how to go about doing that. You'll have to learn how to speak if you're not really comfortable speaking in public or doing things like that. There's a lot of hands-on practicing, learning presentations, practicing those presentations, going through things with your trainer. All of us have a shadow, kind of a shadow partner. So when I was onboarded, my shadow partner came here from Arizona and basically like, that's training. This is the real world. This is what you need to know. So there's a lot of support. I think for a new person coming in, they say that the ramp up time is about a year. So you can stay
Wow.
that you're new practically for a year because there are just a lot of subtle different things that you need to understand about the FDA compliance,
Mhm.
legal requirements, or certain things you can and cannot do, to the point that if you break the rules by the FDA, not only can you get fined individually, your company can get fined, you can get blacklisted by the FDA, and you'll no longer be allowed to be able to work in the industry.
Okay.
So if you are a person that's not ethical, you won't last very long in the industry.
That's really great information. I mean, that sounds like you have a lot of good support and a good system in terms of the training process. And do you feel really well supported by your peers and by your company?
I do. And I think it needs to be that way because I work in the field by myself, basically. So
Okay.
I have the Los Angeles area, and being here in California is a little bit different. So my closest peers are in Orange County, which is about 45 minutes south of me, or in Central California, which is like an hour and a half from me. So I'm lucky. But some of my
Hmm.
peers have multiple states. So when you're kind of
Wow.
working independently, you have to have some type of support system. So a lot of phone calls back and forth, text messages with each other, having a good day, checking in, anything I can help you with. So I probably definitely talk to my work colleagues at least once or twice a day over several days a week. So even though I work by myself for the most part, I'm always in touch with my coworkers. And people are not afraid to ask for help or ask for support because sometimes you're just lonely out there. You need to be able to stay in touch. And if you are the kind of person that has a big territory, it's even more important to stay in touch so you can feel like you're supported. And I would say in general, um, the clinical teams I've worked on, meaning like the teams that have had mainly nurses, pharmacists, nurse practitioners, we're just a tight knit group of professional people that want to support each other. And so that makes a big difference too.
Absolutely. So are there any specific certifications for this specialty as like a critical care nurse can get a specific certification for that? Is there anything in the pharmacy industry?
There's nothing in the pharmaceutical industry. So there are
Okay.
some training programs that will teach you how to be like a pharmaceutical sales rep, but it's not a recognized certification program that companies accept. For things like this, if you're a clinical person, so if you are a nurse practitioner, a nurse, on my team, we also have respiratory therapists and pharmacists. So we have a variety of clinical specialties. What's important is that maybe you have some type of background related to the disease that you'll be working within. So, for example, if you were a person that was going to be an educator for a company that made oncology medications,
Yeah.
likely they would want you to have some type of either experience working on an oncology unit, maybe in an infusion center or a cancer center, so that your learning curve is a lot, less than what it might be. But then some companies are willing to train if you don't have that background, but you have a strong background in other areas. They are willing sometimes to discount having that necessary requirement and then, train you once you get into the position.
Yeah. Okay. So paint a picture of what a typical day looks like for you.
Mm-hmm. So a typical day is not a typical day. That's the first thing, which is really good. It gets a lot of variety. So a typical day for me might be me meeting with patients to provide my educational class to them. So I meet with patients to be able to do that. A typical day for me might be getting together with my other sales colleagues to talk about some of the things that I need to do in offices to raise awareness or to provide. Sometimes I might need to go to an office and drop off information that they might need for their patients. I worked yesterday, for example. So today is Monday. I worked yesterday, Sunday, because I spoke at a support group. So sometimes as part of my either evening or weekend, which is not that often, but I might spend a couple of hours at a support group. So it's very self-directed. I have to be able to make my own schedule every day, understand what my colleagues around me are doing, seeing if there's anything special going on, like if there is a like a professional association conference, a physicians conference, or if there is a nursing conference or something, and set my schedule accordingly so that I could make sure I educate my patients, follow up with the physicians I need to follow up with, and then do any other advocacy or anything like that.
So Ash asks, do you know ahead of time when you accept a job what kind of medication you'll be working with? Or are all the medication companies hiring for these positions specialized to one kind of medication?
Are all the companies hiring? No, when you get hired, when you're kind of in the process of interviewing and being hired, you will know the area in which you are going to be hired into. So if it is a company that makes cardiac drugs, oncology drugs, respiratory drugs, nephrology drugs, when you're being hired, you will know the area that you're going to be going into, and it's your responsibility to kind of do some research on that. So if I were, applying to like a Johnson & Johnson or a Pfizer, for example, for a particular position, usually in the job description, it will give you an indication in the area in which you'll be working. Every now and then, sometimes it's vague, but if you get in touch with the recruiter, they'll be able to specifically spell out, oh, it's for this particular segment of the company that you'll be that the position is for, and it'll give you information about the medications.
Okay, good. Thank you. So what would you say your top 3 challenges are in this position?
I'd say my top 3 challenges are just really staying organized and on top of all the little things. Besides doing my kind of patient-focused classes and things like that, there is a ton of administrative work that needs to be done. So I am required to make sure that I log in my activities, that I keep up with my expense reports and my activity reports, things like that. So that's a challenge, is kind of all the admin work. Sometimes when it comes to working with patients, patients have their own priorities. So sometimes I'm challenged by being able to set up my classes with patients and be able to meet with them. And I think the third challenge is the area in which I work is for with patients who have a very serious lung condition. And so sometimes the psychological toll is there. And that if I don't find a way to kind of decompress from that, take care of myself, put things in perspective, talk to my colleagues, take a day off when I need to take a day off, different things like that, putting in the work, doing that can take kind of a mental toll. So I'm really careful to kind of make sure I add in some PTO days where needed, and to talk to my colleagues if I'm, in a particularly tough situation and it's just emotionally draining for me.
I love that you make your mental health important, because I think so many of us don't necessarily put that in our forefront of important things that need to be dealt with on the daily basis, right?
Definitely.
So I'm so thankful that you do that. Are there resources in your industry to help you, maybe like support groups or meetings that happen that talk about your mental health as a team? Anything like that available?
You know, I don't think that there's anything like that in our industry itself. I think for the companies I've worked for, that's been done kind of on a team level. So, well, I take that back. At my company, we have a particular team, we call them the Culture Club. And so they send us out weekly reminders of things to take care of our body, our mind, and our spirit. And as a matter of fact, one of my teammates, I remember when I first started on our conference call, we did like a really quick, like a 10-minute meditation with breath work and things like that. So I think in our industry, to me, it seems to be driven more like our leadership. If our managers are in touch with doing things like that and they make that a priority, that kind of trickles down into our team. And if you have a manager where that's not a priority, that's what leads to burnout. You know, just like with working in the hospital, the tone is set a lot by your manager and the culture of the company in which you work. So if that's not something that's a priority to them, it won't trickle down to us. So I'm fortunate that, you know, my manager makes that a priority, and we use the strengths of our teammates. I mean, who knew that I had a teammate that was really great at meditation and yoga and things like that? But that's a strength that we bring into our group.
That's great. So when you're meeting with patients, are you meeting them face to face?
I'm meeting with sometimes face to face, and sometimes I meet with them remotely. So if they, for some reason, don't have capacity to be able to meet with me, I can do what I need to do with them by phone. I've had a patient who who wanted to FaceTime with me, and so I FaceTime with her. But usually I try to meet with them in person because I can meet with them and their family members to be able to talk about what we need to talk about and answer any questions that any of them might have. And that way, when everyone hears it, everyone's on the same page. It's kind of like the ideal thing that I would have wished for when I worked in the hospital, for everyone to be there at the day of discharge so you can explain everything one time and have everyone be on the same page. So I try and do that in my own way when I set up my appointments with patients, invite family, friends, different things like that.
That's really helpful for them. So when you're discussing your company's products with your patients and their families, how do you go about doing that when there might be something, maybe a better solution out there and available? How do you work that?
Well, we have to abide by a certain set of standards when discussing things with patients. So we're not allowed to discuss the competition, whatever that might be, with our patients. By the time I see patients, their physician has already made that decision. So that's not a part of my conversation with patients. If patients ask me, if patients have questions about another medication, I don't have all the information that makes it compliant for me to be able to talk with them. I'm required to refer the patient back to their physician to address those questions. So if I get a question, you know, you ask me, I'm taking this medication, I'm not sure if it's the right one for me. I might ask you, why do you think that's the case? And then depending on what they say, I said, that's something you probably need to discuss a little bit further with your family or your physician. Sometimes it might be a question about what they're taking, if there's a conflict with another condition they have. So say that they have a cardiac condition and a kidney condition. Is the medication going to conflict? Whatever it is, you know, if it's something that's medically related, I always turn them back around to their physician or their pharmacist. I let them know that it's beyond the scope of what I'm authorized to talk with them about, because I have a very specific what we call an unbranded or a disease state discussion with patients. Then we have a very specific discussion about the medication that they're taking. And I have I'm in a box, like literally like this, with what I can talk about. And if anything falls out of that box, I'm required to return them back to their physician. So that was a long answer to a short question, but that's essentially how you work it. It's yeah, like I said, if you were to breach that protocol, that would be something that could get you fired and potentially fined by the FDA, as well as blacklisted from working in the industry anymore. And I worked too hard for my license and too hard for my job to risk that.
Absolutely. So how did you go about choosing one pharmaceutical company over another?
I looked at, when I was first getting started, I looked at where the territory was going to be located. So the first job I had way back when, the territory that it covered, my hospital was in the middle of it. So I knew that I'd be calling on physicians that were physicians that I knew in the hospital. So my first job was as a salesperson. As I got further along in my experience, I started to look for things that were more clinically focused. So once I had the experience working in sales and in marketing, I had the opportunity to work in training, and the director of training for a company I worked for was also a nurse, which was really great. And she opened my eyes to other things that I could do that really used my clinical background more so than like a business background. So then I started looking for jobs that had things like clinical educator, clinical instructor, educator, clinical specialist, different things like that. Because those are kind of some of the common phrases that are used when they're looking for someone with a clinical background. So the nice thing about having a license is that there are a lot of people who are nurses that work as salespeople, hospital sales, institutional sales, and there are also individuals that work in clinical education like me. And there's also something called medical science liaisons, or MSLs, which is really great for like nurses who are nurse practitioners. So there's something kind of for everyone depending on what your clinical background is. And that helps to figure out kind of what you're going to do or what you want to look for.
Sure. So you answered a lot of the questions that the tribe members actually submitted in previously. So that's wonderful. In terms of advancement, once you get a clinical position, is there advancement available there?
There's advancement. So usually, I remember when I worked in the hospital, we had things like RN 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
So there are varying levels like that within the industry. So the more experience you get, the better you do on your performance evaluations, whatever your various, benchmarks or metrics are, and each company is different. Then you can qualify to be promoted. And some companies do that based on evaluations. Some do it based on evaluations plus feedback from other departments. So for example, if you work in a position like, say, you're a clinical support person that works in the OR, part of what helps get you promoted is how well you work with other teams, how well do you work with the educators, or how well do you work with the salespeople, how well do you work with the reimbursement people. So sometimes there are other extra factors that contribute to it. There's opportunities to go into leadership. So nurses can rise to the level of managers or associate directors. I think for our team, our director, she's a PA. But that's something. So there's lots of different ways to get promoted. Some people like to go into different parts of the company. So somebody might want to get promoted and they have another interest in marketing. They might have an interest in training. They might have an interest in working with advocacy groups. So some people would like to pursue something that's a little bit different than what they're using their clinical background for, but it will enhance whatever that other area of interest is. So there are ways to get promoted within the industry, not just as being a nurse and staying kind of in your lane as a nurse, but if you're interested in other avenues as well.
So many opportunities. I had no idea.
God. There are tons. I had no idea, Chelsea. I mean, once I got into it, it was like, my God. You just don't know.
I'm just like,
I know.
Wow, I had no idea that the pharmaceutical industry was just, there's a plethora of opportunities for healthcare workers, not just nurses and nurse practitioners, but respiratory therapists. I had no clue. There was no clue at all.
If you're working, for a company that has respiratory drugs, and there's something like, it makes perfect sense to have either a pharmacist, respiratory therapist be able to do it. And then I'm also thinking, I've met nurses who've been clinical trial coordinators. So when I've gone into some offices, they also have a branch of that physician's office that does research. So there are nurses that are often the clinical coordinators, nurses who are responsible for taking in adverse event reporting, which is a requirement. If I encounter a patient who's had an adverse event, I'm required to report it. Some of the people who work in that department are nurses. Medical writers, we need people to write things up, are nurses as well, or PAs or nurse practitioners or whatever. So there is just a boatload of different things that people can do.
Yeah, and when you and I talked previously in your bio, it says that a pharmacy company paid for your master's. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. They paid for my master's. It's a really unusual master's. It's a master's degree in spiritual psychology, which sounds really woo-woo, but really it is essentially we're all connected. Bottom line, we're all connected. People go through different things and basically treat people how you want to be treated, but learn the skills to be able to kind of have a learning orientation in life. So learn how to listen to people, learn how to learn from everything that happens. Like, don't take things personally. Find a way to learn from different people, different opinions, different attitudes, just a lot of different really great communication skills. So the company I worked for at the time, they were still paying for tuition reimbursements. So I took the description of the curriculum and syllabus and reframed it to say, if I get this degree, these different classes will help me be able to relate to people better, understand the physician's point of view better, have empathy, have sympathy, have better listening skills, which is all those different things are important in healthcare anyway. And as nurses, we have a lot of them, but it's a little bit unusual to kind of focus on that as kind of a strength for pharmaceutical companies. So they agreed to pay for 75% of it.
That's amazing. And I think it is completely applicable to our jobs as nurses.
Absolutely.
Whether you're working in pharmacy or at the bedside, I think it's very applicable.
Right.
Yeah. And again, I wouldn't have thought of it. I wouldn't have thought of it myself, but I love that you thought of it and that you found it useful. So what would you say is your favorite thing about working in pharmacy?
I think my favorite thing about it is, since I've been in it for 20 years, it provides a lot of flexibility, for myself and my family. So there have been times where I needed to quick, run and pick up a kiddo and take them to the dentist and then maybe drop them off at home or at my mom's house and go back to work, and I can do that. So there's a lot of autonomy and flexibility in what I do. At the same time, that requires me to be accountable and to really be kind of a self-starter and things like that. That's definitely one of my favorite things with it. I feel like I'm using my nursing skills in a different way. It's more like, after you're not using your like hands-on skills anymore, you kind of have this like nurse way of thinking. And I like the way that I can apply kind of my nurse way of thinking to problem solving and to doing my job. I love the people that I work with. The other nurses that I work with are phenomenal, or the respiratory therapists I work for. And so I think it's just the culture of the industry. It suits me. It's more autonomous. It's very professional, a lot of personal satisfaction. I feel like I know that what I do helps to change the lives of patients I work with, because I'm giving them the tools to understand what they need to know, so they are empowered to make better choices in the future about whatever they need to for their care. And to know that that makes a difference for patients, it's very fulfilling, in that way.
That's great. So these questions probably go hand in hand. Someone just put in the question, if you could change one thing about your job, what would it be? And also, what is the hardest part of your job?
I think the hardest part of anybody's job in the industry, is just there've been so many changes in healthcare. And I think that, anybody in any company, that just impacts the way that you can do things, what you can do, what you can't do. And sometimes there's just so much red tape for patients. So if there's anything I could change just on a global scale, it would be just somehow to simplify the healthcare system for patients, because I get questions sometimes that have nothing to do with what I'm there for, but they have a nurse in front of them that they can talk to and ask questions about. And I wish I could just like go home with them and pick up the phone call and help them to call their doctor's office or to get their lab results, or there's just so many different things. I think for me in my job, I understand the limits, that I need to work in, and that helps to keep patients safe and myself safe from, accidentally sharing information that might not be appropriate. But at the same time, I wish I had just more of an ability to be able to pick up the phone on behalf of a patient and just make a phone call, because I understand what they need to do, but I have to explain what they need to do. And sometimes they don't always pick that up. So that's a little bit frustrating.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I know that most nurses, I won't say most, a lot of nurses have a side hustle. Do you have one if you want to tell us about it?
Well, my project is my podcast. So I probably, gosh, I don't know how long it's been on my mind, but it's been on my mind for a while. Okay. And since I have been in this field for a long time, I've come across a lot of different nurses in different, walks of life. So different specialties, different career paths, just all different kind of things. And so I just wanted to just be chatty and sit down with people and have a conversation about it. So, which is how I contacted you in this group to see if you'd be willing to talk to me about what you're up to, TriBRN and different things like that. Yeah. So that's it's kind of like my personal development passion project. I don't know where it's going to go, but right now I'm just having fun, having conversations with nurses who are doing something different than what I do. And I want to bring those conversations to the forefront. So if nurses are curious about what TriBRN is and how did Chelsea start that business, or a nurse that I spoke with, she is getting a doctorate in social work, and she's hoping to create a standard of care that will change the way patients are taken care of at home. I mean, wow. Besides having just a fun conversation, it's just amazing to find out what nurses are doing. So that's kind of my side hustle, passion, and project for now, because I really love my day job. Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of my little personal, professional outlet.
And I love that there's just so many opportunities in nursing. If you worked hard enough to get your degree and you're burnt out or not satisfied in whatever area it is that you're working in, there's opportunities out there for you. It's endless. So I want one last question. And what is it that you are looking forward to most about your career?
I think I'm at a point now, I'm looking more forward most to giving back through the podcast. I'm hoping to be able to bring on all different kinds of people. I know there's a LinkedIn person, a recruiter that's on LinkedIn in the group. As a matter of fact, today I got an email from a recruiter asking if I was interested in this clinical nurse specialist position, and it pays well over 6 figures. And so I'm hoping what I could do, what I'm looking forward to, is connecting with other nurses through the podcast and connecting people to the right resources or the right person or the right information, so that if they are burned out, or if they're looking for a change, or they're looking for just some variety in their career, they are just ready to make a move, then the podcast and the information I'll provide will be a source for that. So I'm definitely most looking forward to being a source of support and encouragement for nurses who are just ready to make a change, whatever that change might be. Or if they want to stay on the floor, support them in that too. The different things they can learn to do for that, because we need nurses everywhere. So it's not that I'm encouraging nurses to leave the bedside. I just know that when nurses are in different environments and we put our take on things, it's better for patients no matter where we go. So we have impact everywhere. And I want to be able to be a conduit for that.
That's amazing. Tell us how we can find your podcast. And of course, I will put links of all Christy's good stuff in her information. But go ahead and tell us what your podcast is and how we can find it.
Well, it's going to be launching in the middle of next month, so around March 10th. So nothing is active right now, but you'll be able to find it once it is open at beyondmed-surg.com. Chelsea put the information in the link, but nothing's there right now. So as soon as it's all updated, the podcasts are edited and polished and things like that, which takes a little bit of extra time, I'll let you know so we can let everyone know when it goes live. And then anyone here in the group is welcome to find me on LinkedIn, Christy Moore, RN, clinical educator. If you search for me, Christy Moore, RN, and I'll send you a link, Chelsea. You can put in the group also for LinkedIn. If you're curious about other things, I would encourage all the nurses to get on LinkedIn and create a profile and let the recruiters start coming to find you if you want something. But that's the best way to be able to find me right now is on LinkedIn.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for your time. And Tribe, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a blessed day. Have a great one.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you, Chelsea.
Yes, thank you.